Janeway to Chakotay, Scorpion. And hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 25 episodes of Star Trek. Each month, counting down a different entry in my personal top 25 favorite episodes of Star Trek. This month, we're getting to my number 17, which is Scorpion, the two-part Voyager episode, talking about both parts. And I'm joined here, so I'm not lonely by myself, by the usual two great guests. First, Darrin from these reviews. Darrin, thanks so much.
Very excited to be here. Great couple of episodes here with some resounding payoff. So yeah, can't wait to jump in and chat about Scorpion.
All right. And of course, as always, Alyssa, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you again for having me. I'm looking forward to talking about Scorpion parts 1 and 2.
Now, I don't usually do this, but I want to explain my screen name, even though it may seem self-evident. But it's actually a callback to a friend of mine. When I first saw this episode, actually someone in the chat was asking, who else saw this episode when it first aired? And I was like, I did, because when it first aired, I think I was 19 years old. And at the time I was hanging out with a friend, Ben, who Alyssa, you knew as shaggy long-haired dude. But anyway, we'd hang out and get stoned almost every day, and we got stoned, watched this episode. And at the time, I was obsessed with wearing a watch. I mean, this was the late 90s or whatever. And I always wore a watch, and he gave me shit about that. He's like, why do you need a watch? Why do you always need to have what time it is? And he started calling me a Borg drone. He's like, you're like a Borg drone. And so my Borg name was 7 of 11. So that's what he called me all the time. Every time I looked at my watch, he's like, okay, 7 of 11. But anyway, that was sort of a call out to that. But anywho, Brandon's saying I'm wearing headphones and I jumped when you went live. Okay, so hopefully I'm not too loud. I know I have my microphone turned up a bit loud.
I think he was just surprised because
we just jumped right in.
Yeah, you don't say that to me.
Anyway, okay, so overall thoughts on the episode Scorpion. Darrin, we'll start with you.
Well, look, I mean, this was a great episode, and as I was thinking about mentioning before, if one didn't necessarily want to go through all of the early episodes of Voyager for whatever personal reasons, this was definitely a great jump in point, because I think it's a great transition from where the show kind of started out to where it started going in afterwards. And let's be honest, I mean, outside of, we'll say, the original cast, the original series cast, and all of that, there are three kind of pillars of royalty, I think, of Star Trek now. And that's the Next Generation. I'm just going to say all of it, everyone there. Quarks, as kind of that interstellar bar and stopping place. And 7 of 9. I think it was rightly that Picard picked up her character and brought her in. Jeri Ryan is amazing, not only in this character, but as a person. I will just say, during the SAG strike, Jeri was on the picket lines every single day. So she is there for the actor. She is there for the show. She is, I think, the one real strong character. I mean, and outside of Janeway's participation in Prodigy, I'm not going to down that out or anything like that. But I think of everything that Voyager really brought to, the one that kind of like holds forward the most and perpetuates forward the most, I think, is 7 of 9, the introduction of 7 of 9. And this, of course, is where we do get to meet her for the first time. So it's a wonderful episode, some great back and forth with Chakotay and Janeway, and really transitioning the show, I think, into the better form of it after this point.
Cool, awesome. And Alyssa, your thoughts?
So I know you're going to ask at the end where this ranks for us. So just a little bit of a spoiler. I won't say exactly where it was in my top 100, but a little bit of a spoiler. This is my favorite Voyager episode. These two episodes, counting it as one, as a two-parter. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit more, but this is before Voyager felt the need to bring in the Borg Queen. My favorite two-part Voyager or Borg episode, Best of Both Worlds, also no Borg Queen, so there is a little bit of a pattern. But they have one of the best. This episode has one of the best cold openings when you just see the Borg ships just be destroyed and like what, and then hooks you in, introduces a great new adversary in species 8472. The stakes are really high all throughout, and even though 8472 does get kind of ruined later on in the series, also the CGI. I remember at the time I was like, man, those aliens look scary. Now it kind of looks a little corny, but we have better technology now. But they were frightening though, and they still are, even if the CGI doesn't hold up. Their whole presence is really frightening, and all of that together with the Borg just makes for such riveting episodes. And I'm sure we'll get through everything because there's a lot that I love about this. There's the Chakotay and Janeway speech, or not speech, but the argument that they have that I'm sure we'll get to. Of course, as Darrin was talking about, the introduction of 7 of 9. So just so many great things about these episodes. That's why I hold them at such high regard. It's my favorite Voyager episode. So can't wait to get more into it with y'all.
Absolutely. Those of you who are familiar with my channel who know me would not be shocked at all to hear me say that I like this episode better than Best of Both Worlds, which is most different than most people. Best of Both Worlds will not appear in my top 25 because I don't think it's as good as everyone else does, but I still like it. It'd probably be in my top 50, maybe, but not top 25. But, that's, as I said that on my channel a billion times before. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. To me, this two-parter just, it's almost like and Alyssa, I can totally get why this would be your number one favorite Voyager episode, because it's almost like the pinnacle of Voyager, because they do the best with the Chakotay and Janeway's relationship. It's like summed up in this one episode. Like you don't even need any more episodes with them, because they never utilized that properly at the beginning of the show. They introduced, they're gonna have this renegade and he's gonna become Janeway's first officer, and they never really played tension between them very well. It was just like, oh yeah, I'm the first officer now and I'm really willing to do what you want. And here they really played off the fact that they were close and yet could have such different viewing. I think it's like one of the best examples of first officer captain disagreement in all of Star Trek. And then you throw in the Borg, you throw in the great introduction of the Borg, like doing the Borg correctly on Voyager, which is something not really done after this, maybe once or twice. And then Species 8472 and doing that so well. And then also on top of that, introducing who would become the best character of the entire show, 7 of 9, and doing that all in this two-parter. So yeah, it's definitely, up there for me, which is why, I mean, we're really like getting to the nitty gritty now of my top 25 of the episodes that I think are just really, really good. So yeah, I think I had a super chat in here before. Jordan Johnson saying, is your favorite Janeway quote in this episode? My favorite is in the episode Relativity. I don't care if history itself comes unraveled. I'm off the top of my head, my favorite Janeway quote is actually from Year of Hell, where she says, "This is 1 year." This is 1 year I'd like to forget. And then she said, "Time's up," right before crashing the ship into the other one. That's probably my favorite Janeway quote.
Well, Mark, I just wanted to state for the record, although I obviously think more highly of Best of Both Worlds than you do, As far as the comparison to this episode, they are one spot apart. Best of both worlds, one spot higher than this. So even though I do think I'm more highly of both of them than you do, I have them very close together. So I don't think there's that much of a difference. Quality-wise, they are epic two-parters featuring the Borg that have no Borg Queen. So to me, I have them very close together. So you're not that crazy having it ranked higher than
fair. Yeah, no, fair enough. I was just watching another podcast where they watched this episode for the first time. They were like, "Oh yeah, this episode's nowhere near as good as Best of Both Worlds."
Yeah, they probably went in thinking that. I mean, yeah, it's a different type of thing. Like it's good for different reasons.
Yeah. I know. I think I said in my review that for me, Best of Both Worlds is a good Riker. It's a great Riker episode, and it's a good Picard episode. But I think there are better Riker and better Picard episodes in Next Gen. Whereas I don't think there's better Chakotay Janeway episodes in Voyager. I think this is the height.
Well, to me, that just speaks to the fact that there are more great Riker. Great Chakotay and Janeway episodes. But that's just me.
Well, look, in Best of Both Worlds, we lost a captain, and in Scorpion, we gained a Borg. So, it just depends on how you weigh it out.
There you go. All right, another super chat from Brandon. Brandon, thanks so much. Saying, thanks for Starfleet IT. Referencing a video I haven't released yet. I've only released for my Patreons. It's my review for Contagion, but you'll see it when it comes. But anyway. Cool. So, so let's go ahead and jump into the particulars of the episode. So let's start with, this is the episode where Voyager enters Borg space. Now, this is something a lot of the nerds, such as myself, watching Voyager for the first 3 years, looking at those maps on the book that, that said, hey, the Borg's home is in the Delta Quadrant. Voyager's in the Delta Quadrant. How come Voyager hasn't encountered the Borg yet? And this is something that they weren't guaranteed to do. Like, they thought maybe they would just skip over this part, not have, Voyager into the Borg. But they alluded to, this isn't the first Borg episode in Voyager. They alluded to one earlier, but that was like a dead Borg ship or whatever, and there was some X drones on the planet. This is the first time they full on go into Borg space, and I think that was a very ominous way to begin the episode, and sort of got them into the mindset of it presented the dilemma right then and there. Like, what the fuck do we do? Their space is huge. We either have to turn around, and which would add years and years and years to our journey, or try to just go through it. And then they have this Northwest Passage, which I think was a funny thing to call it, which of course later on turned out to be where species 8472 was coming from. But that was a nice little, we'll just go through this passage and get through Borg space. And of course, Alyssa already mentioned the teaser. I think when I did my top 10 favorite teasers of Star Trek, that was my number one, was from this episode. I think it was one of the shortest. It was like 27 seconds long. Just like, we are the Borg, a whole bunch of Borg ships, and then they immediately get destroyed. You're like, what the everlasting fuck? I think that was such a great hook. It's like the epitome of less is more. As like, that's all you need. And then so you jump into Voyager realizing they're entering Borg space, and there's this big sort of daunting introduction to the Borg and Voyager. So I guess, Alyssa, I'll start with you. Was this done really well for you? Was this like a really good way to introduce the Borg into Voyager?
Yes, absolutely. Now, as far as Voyager entering into Borg space, you mentioned the what book was it that had the map on it? They were in the Delta.
I can't remember. I've seen it in several books. I think it was an encyclopedia or something like that. Yeah.
Because then that was a change from Q Who. Because in Q Who, they said Q just snapped them like 20 years away or something like that. I think
Yeah.
20 or 25 years away, which the Delta Quadrant is well established to be much farther away. Voyager was what, like 80 years away or whatever when they first started out. So I didn't realize that it was in a book too, because that does kind of a retcon to put the Borg into the Delta Quadrant because they weren't originally. Or the Delta Quadrant was closer originally, one or the other, but they definitely changed something. But that was the second season, Next Generation. You can't, they hadn't figured shit out yet. So, but yeah, I don't recall, like, I don't remember that I necessarily like was expecting them to go into Borg space per se. Yeah, and in my mind, because I was not a huge fan of Voyager for the first 3 seasons, I thought it was okay, and I still do. I still to this day think overall it's a pretty mediocre show. But when it was first airing, I was kind of just sort of, yeah, it's not as good as Deep Space Nine. It's not as good as Next Generation, but it's fine. And I took the entry into Borg space, by my memory, as the show giving up on this whole idea of, oh, we're going to do something brand new and different, and which is what it was billed as. When I remember reading about it in the TV Guide before it came out, and like, oh, in the Entertainment Weekly, oh, this show is going to like go into brand new space, and they failed at that because they just kept doing all the Alpha Quadrant, all the stuff that could have easily taken place in the Alpha Quadrant. And then so I took it as a signal of, oh, fuck it, let's just do the Borg because we can't actually think of anything new. And at that time, the Borg hadn't been really ruined for me yet. So I was like, yeah, let's do the Borg. Let's do it. And I was excited to see it. And they did it but it really exceeded my expectations. It's better than I was expecting them to do it. Of course, after this, they do fuck it up big time and ruin the Borg. But for these 2 episodes, the first like true Borg episodes, you mentioned that other one with what was the name of that episode where they found those dudes who used to be in the collective or whatever? They had that episode before.
Unity.
Yeah, Unity. But this was the first like true Borg episode, and I thought, yeah, it far exceeded my expectations. And right from the get-go, we've been talking about that opening. We are the Borg, and then they just get destroyed, and it's really quick, and you're like, what the fuck? That just hooked me. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be good. Like, this is gonna be good. So yeah, I think they did an excellent job with all of that. The Voyager enter into Borg space. It's again what comes later that is not so great, but for the purpose of these episodes, amazing.
Yeah, I will say I heard from several places that the original plan for the season 3 finale was to do a Year of Hell. And at one point, they even wanted to make it a season-long story arc to be an actual Year of Hell, because that was teased in that Cass episode before and after. But at the last minute, they decided to change it to the Borg, partly because I think they wanted to introduce 7 of 9 as the main character and to change things up, but also because they wanted to go with the Borg because they're already a fan established entity, and they were like, oh, this Year of Hell, they might not like it, they might like these new guys, so let's fall back on what we know of that as already a fan favorite. And I can't complain too much because it's a great episode and 7 of 9 is a great character, but I would have loved to have the Year of Hell as a year and not just a 2-parter. But
well, I'm hoping that at some future point, I don't know what your future list is, we might have that discussion. But one of the great things about bringing in characters like the Borg is the fact that, yeah, it's a fan favorite, and it makes sense why you would shift that around. And especially if you already had plans to bring in and do a 7 of 9 type of introduction, I think this is the way to do it. But more, because it's a fan favorite and because there's such dangerous beings, like, how do you deal with that? And I like the discussion that our characters have beforehand. as I say, as they go, we're now entering into Borg space and all of that back and forth and worry and concern. But that opening does brings it in the best place that you can, because the Borg are so powerful. What do? You put them over. If you're wrestling fans, you show them up. You show that they're not the toughest person on the block. Now somebody else is. So now it sets up a whole new tribe that our characters, our cast, our crew don't know about. So it becomes an area of discovery that they can do. You get a great villain intro with species 8472. The fact that it ends up resulting because the Borg were overstretching what they could conquer. They were looking for more space, and it's their own fault. Adds an even perfect edge to it. And I think that's how you kind of can bring in Voyager to a way that they can deal with the Borg. Because again, it's not suddenly this overpowering villain. Now you have somebody that are like, oh man, we're in trouble. Hey, humans, if you got some ideas, we're willing to listen now. I think it's just kind of a perfect little twist, and it ups the tension, which is something that this episode did through actually both parts really well. It ramps up the tension, especially by entering Borg space immediately, and it keeps it ramped up going through. You're worried about the Borg, you're trying to get past, and all of a sudden there's this new species, and then all of a sudden they're getting their butts kicked. Then it's got to turn around. I mean, it's a kind of a non-stop, both in tension and pace, and I think that works really well. Both for a season finale, season, opener, but also just to, like I said, move into this kind of new area of space for Voyager itself in regards to storytelling. You're muted.
Sorry. I think one of the best scenes, and I remember being really blown away by this, when I first saw it, was when all the Borg cubes were like coming at Voyager, and Harry Kim's like, oh, there's 5, no, there's 6, no, there's 7, no, there's 15, and you see like 15 Borg cubes fly at Voyager, and at this stage, like, we've only saw one like at a time, and even one was like impossible to beat. So that was just like, that was completely, awesome. But there's a way that could be mishandled, which Voyager proves later. But it was handled correctly in this episode because they made it so that Voyager wasn't really their target, that the target was species 8472, which is what I want to get into next. Species 8472, otherwise known as the Undine, I believe, but that was used on Star Trek Online, so it's not actually in canon. In canon, it's just species 8472. And it was a very, like someone asked earlier, I think in the chat, about the CGI, and yeah, it's late 90s CGI, so no, it does not hold up to modern, but I think they were done like so well that I'm able to look past that. Like, I'm able to just go with it. I mean, watching 90s CGI is a lot less jarring than watching college mascots run around the original series going like that is a lot harder for me to look past.
Do not talk down to the Gorn, man. Do not talk down to the Gorn.
Anyway.
Or the Mugatu, or is that what
oh yeah, the Mugatu,
yes.
But yeah, so ultimately I'm willing to go with it, especially because of how scary they come off in this episode, the way they're introduced. And I think that was actually a sort of a step of brilliance of like, how do we introduce the Borg into Voyager? Voyager's just one ship who are like an insect to the Borg, and they say, well, the answer is introduce an even greater enemy that could defeat the Borg. And I love how, like, good old naive Harry Kim, his first reaction was like, oh, this is our way out. We have an ally. And Chakotay is like, no, I would calm down on that for a second. Because, of course, they turn out to be worse than the Borg. They tend to be space Nazis. who just want to eradicate everything in this galaxy. They come from a different galaxy, and their catchphrase, which I had to write down because I never remember what it is, tells you it's not as catchy as "you will be assimilated, resistance is futile." Their catchphrase is "the weak will perish," which didn't really catch on. But yeah, I think they were used incredibly well in this episode. They will be used well in one other episode before they are completely ruined and destroyed and then never heard of again, because Voyager Season 5 decided to ruin the species entirely and try to retcon this episode at the same time. But as it is, like, I don't think you really... It doesn't... To me, it doesn't hurt this episode, the fact that they don't become a big species. They don't become a big thing. I think it's fine that they only exist in this episode and the one other episode, Prey, which is also a good episode. But other than that, they don't really exist in a good space. And that's fine. I'm fine with that because they're used so well. And I think the point of this episode is definitely, especially the part 2, they make it clear what they're focused more on the Borg. Like, the Borg are not the innocent victims because they're the ones that went looking for a fight, and they found. And I think the concept is really interesting that they have like super, genetic makeup that's impossible to assimilate, and so the Borg are defenseless against it because they assimilate people and they find out everything about them. So not able to assimilate them, they know nothing about them, they're completely defenseless. So yes, and the way they communicate with Kes, they come off as the big bad guys who just want to kill everyone, and they kill Harry Kim off, or try not kill him off, but that was the thought. I'll get more into that later. But they, attack Harry Kim, and he comes to the sick bay and has all this crap on his face. So, yeah, Species 8472. Darrin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, obviously the irony is that Harry Kim thought that they would be allies, and he ended up almost getting taken out by them with the gross and the tentacles and things. Was kind of nasty. Yeah. No, this, again... a great way to do it by kind of distracting the Borg with a larger problem. And I think this is one of those where, yeah, I would never have needed to see this species again. To be perfectly honest, I would have been fine. You're right. You see him in Prey, which is a good episode. They do work in that. And that's fine. I haven't gotten into my further Voyager episodes, so I haven't seen him totally destroy and ruin things yet. But considering what was done with the Borg and the fact of eventually being really overused and kind of bored out, you can only have a big bad that's super powerful and encounter them so many times until they're not really that powerful. You found a way to work around them, and they're just the monster of the week. I think sometimes it's better to just do a big intro, do something scary, and let them go. Honestly, like you said, for the CGI, not bad. If you're watching Star Trek, you kind of understand where things are. And for television CGI budgets in the 90s, this was pretty well done. So I think it holds up all right. They also don't really overuse it too much. You get a couple of big moments and things like that. And I think they're smart in the way of not overusing. Again, I think that becomes a problem with the Borg. You see the Borg everywhere, and they just become less scary and less, all of that. So, yeah. I don't know. That's all I got.
Yeah, just a quick correction. You said it was somebody in the chat. It was me who was talking about the CGI in my introduction.
There was someone in the chat too, I'm sure.
Oh, I missed that. It was me, but I was also talking about it. What I was saying is that in the 90s, like, it was like high tech CGI to me. Like, I had never seen anything like it, and it like really added to the scariness of the species. And now, like, the look of them is not what scares me anymore, because it's like, okay, 90s CGI, but they're still really scary. I think the scene where they communicate with Kes is just creepy as fuck. they're really frightening, and the fact that they can just have their way with the Borg so easily, and that they're saying the weak will perish, so you know that Harry Kim is wrong. They're definitely not allies. It's just a really scary episode, and it like puts you on edge. So they're just done so well. Except the weak will perish. Except that we're actually the real victims here, and we're going to create this fake Starfleet so that we can find out Oh my god, I hate that they
were a fever dream. That's a fever dream. It's like the Mandela effect. I think we all had it for something. Yeah. We all had bad ramen or something.
I would like to pretend that episode was a fever dream, because it's just like I think that doesn't count for canon. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Because it really thoroughly ruins what is an extremely scary species here. And then in Prey, which is a later episode, they add some nuance to it, which is amazing as well. But here, they're just an incredibly formidable foe, and it just puts you on the edge of your seat and like, how the fuck are they getting out of this? How are our heroes going to get past this dilemma? This is like an impossible task, and it's all because of the way this species was set up. And I think there's a million ways that they could have failed at this. They could have just been like, oh hey, let's come up with a species that is more powerful than the Borg, and that'll add up the tension. But if they had made it so that they were kind of cheesy, and they didn't really sell it to the audience that they were more powerful than the Borg and more of a threat than the Borg and even scarier than the Borg, if they had not pulled that off, then these episodes would not be that great. They would be a laughing stock. It would be like they were trying so hard to make a species that was tougher than the Borg, and they failed. But they didn't here. They really, really pulled it off with flying colors. Like, huge success on how they were able to pull off species 8472. I can't say enough about how good they did with this species.
Oh, and one thing I forgot to bring up before, one of the great things that they did do this is, I think you'd mentioned, Mark, showing the limitations of the Borg, because they can't assimilate the Undine, because they have this super immune system.
Yeah,
they can't learn anything from them because they're so limited. They're so powerful that they just learn by assimilating and taking everything in this way. Then they need Voyager in order to actually do an investigation, because they have no tools to do that. They have no other way of really gathering information. And I thought that was another real smart way of using the Borg's strengths as a weakness and showing, and then allowing, again, it's something Star Trek does always well, and having our Starfleet crew be able to come in and fill that out, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
I thought was a really cool way to do that. And then, of course, really force that cooperation, which, is really the whole second part of this episode.
No, that was definitely very clever. Yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking as I was watching this episode today, like, of why exactly this episode works so well with the Borg, and later episodes of Voyager did not work very well. Now, the easy answer, of course, is the Borg Queen. They never should have introduced the Borg Queen into Voyager. And so I think it was Norman mentioned earlier that this episode was also, when it first came out, they decided to go with the Borg because First Contact had just come out the previous year, was a huge hit for them. So like, oh yeah, First Contact was a huge hit, so we'll do this. But then later they thought, oh, the Borg Queen was in First Contact, so let's bring her back, which was a really stupid mistake. But what the other thing I came up with is why this episode works so well is because the Borg are not focused on Voyager. They're not focused on wiping out humanity. That is not their goal. I think that's why it works. I think in later episodes, when the Borg Queen comes up with these elaborate bullshit James Bond villain-esque plans to assimilate Earth and wipe them out with a virus or some bullshit, you're like, why the fuck don't they just send a fleet of ships to Earth to assimilate it if that's what they want so badly? Because the thing with the Borg, and this is a problem a lot of the writers on TNG talked about, is they're introduced as an impossible to defeat foe, which makes them kind of difficult to write for, because if they're impossible to defeat and yet you end up defeating them every time, then they're not really impossible to defeat, which is exactly what happened in Voyager, where one tiny little ship constantly beats them over and over again, which is not what happened in this episode. And the other Borg episodes I really like, which you may or may not see later on, such as the episode Drone or the episode Survival Instinct, I think those are two other really great uses of the Borg in Voyager. And in both cases, it's not really about the Borg trying to assimilate humanity. It's about the character stories, using character stories within having the Borg here. And I think why it works so well is because, I mean, the Borg want to assimilate Voyager because they want to assimilate everything. And they're just like, well, you're a peon, you're a fly. We want to assimilate you, but that their ultimate goal is not Voyager. The ultimate goal is Species 8472. And they're even willing to put assimilating Voyager on hold in order to accomplish the greater goal, which is the better war. And so I think that's why these episodes work, is because they focus the Borg primary goal is focused on a greater enemy. And in other episodes that didn't focus too much on, oh, the Borg have got to assimilate Earth, that's when it falls apart, because you got one tiny little ship of Voyager in the midst of a bunch of Borg. And so to say, oh, they just survive because they're awesome, they keep defeating them, it makes the Borg come off as cartoon characters who suck and are no longer scary and no longer intimidating. We'll start with you on this one. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kind of just agree with. I agree with everything you said. And J Cameron 99 in the chat says, "Yeah, Mark, but remember in the finale, the Queen reveals that she let Voyager win the entire time. So that explains why Voyager."
Wait, did she reveal that?
Yeah.
I don't remember. I know in Dark Frontier she said she put 7 of 9 as a plant.
Right.
So they could do this elaborate scheme with doing a virus on Earth, which they never do for no reason. Like they never say why they didn't do that. And the whole thing of saying they put 709 as a plant is such an insult to this episode. It absolutely does not fit into this. I just watched this episode. She's not a fucking plant. The Borg didn't plan to put her on Voyager. That's so stupid.
Yeah.
And the Borg Queen does not have a mustache to twirl. So, I mean, none of that stuff should be being talked about. That's, yeah.
I mean, she may well have a mustache. Anyway, it was my turn to talk. What were we talking about again?
Why the Borg work in this episode and not others?
Yeah. I think I mean, obviously the Borg Queen not being there, that is the thing that I always point to. My two favorite Borg two-parters both are lacking the Borg Queen. And then they try to, in First Contact, they try to retcon the Borg Queen into Best of Both Worlds. And when I watch Best of Both Worlds, the fuck she's there. She is not there. Fuck that. She is definitely 1,000,000% not there. So they always, with the Borg Queen, that's what they have to do. They try to retcon her into previous episodes and try to ruin the only good Borg episodes that they had because there was no friggin' Borg Queen in them. But yeah, that is the obvious answer. But I think you make a lot of great points about the fact that the Borg are focused on Species 8472, because I think one of the inherent problems with the Borg all throughout Star Trek, and you mentioned how tough it is to write for a species that's unbeatable, is that, and this is one of the big problems I have with First Contact, and one of the many reasons I think it's one of the most overrated movies of all time, not a good movie, is that instead of doing this convoluted plot where they send one Borg ship to Earth, and when that Borg ship fails, they go back in time when there is no technology, even though they're really into technology, but whatever, they have this really convoluted plot. Just send a fleet of ships. Just send a fleet of Borg ships. And that is the inherent problem with the Borg wanting to destroy Earth, is they could easily do it if they really wanted to. But the writers have to write around that in order to make it so the heroes win and the whole Earth doesn't get destroyed in an instant like it would if the Borg just sent a bunch of ships. So these episodes get around that by having the focus be on species 8472, by introducing the species that is more powerful than them, that they have to put all their resources into that. So I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. And as a result, I do, even though species 8472 is the scary species in here, I do like, you never quite trust the Borg either. You're always kind of on edge for, what are the Borg going to do? And that proves the payoff. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the end. Chakotay, Scorpion. At the end there, that you can never quite trust the Borg either. So the Borg are still, something to be a little concerned about too if you're watching this episode. Yeah, and then they just become very silly after this. I like to say that the Enterprise episode Regeneration is the episode Make the Borg Scary Again because they go back to the roots.
Yes.
They introduce a crew who doesn't know who the Borg are, and they're scary again. I think prior to that, this was the last episode where I truly felt scared of the Borg, even though they're not the scariest species in this episode. I'm still a little scared of them, and I think this was the last episodes where I felt that way about them before they got a little silly with the Borg Queen and all that stuff. So yeah, I absolutely agree with what you said, Mark. I think you hit it on the head there.
I just got to address Norman in the chat, who says they had to use a phony Ironic syndrome to take over everyone who's 25 years in the Hunter. Oh, God damn it. I wiped that one from my memory. Anyway, shit. So they're still misusing the Borg to this day. Anyway, Darrin.
Everything you have both said is right. No, seriously, because that is, I mean, it was mentioned, countless times before. That's why you have to have 8472, because it distracts the Borg. That allows a small ship like Voyager to be able to use the resources it has that now that the Borg can't use in order to get a deal from them to try and get through space. And then in a way, they don't even do that. They just kind of get away. The Borg get destroyed. They're just like, all right, we're just going to keep going now. Everything's fine, right? And I think that's why, because it does keep them scary, because the Borg you are always expecting a stab in the back at every moment. And I think the fact that while we have 7 of 9 constantly kind of pushing and disagreeing, even the first thing how 7 of 9 was introduced, when they're like, okay, we need to talk clear. Kunk, kunk, we're going to plug these things into your neck so that we can, we're going to just temporarily assimilate you. It'll be fine. And then we'll connect and then it'll all go. I think that constant kind of pushback, that back and forth, is what makes the episode very well. It's also what keeps that tension going between Chakotay and Janeway, which I think works very well, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. But yeah, the minute that you just have, like you said, tiny ship going against the Borg over and over again, and they always have to win, the only other way that the Voyager should survive an encounter is if it manages to run away. And to me, that would be really the only way to do it, to evade, to distract, to do something like that. Or a Star Trek, hey, we figured out their command code so that we look like a Borg ship and they're stupid, so they won't recognize anything outside of what their instruments will say, and then we can get past them. Those are about the only two kind of acceptable. Otherwise, like you said, the Borg are not going to be interesting because you have to keep beating them. If you keep beating them, they're not that dangerous.
Exactly. Which is really why they should have only used them sparingly and not overdid it. I mean, you got like, I think I mentioned a couple of good character stories with Seven of Nine. So having Seven of Nine allows you to have some Borg episodes without actually using them. And those are good, but they should have just stuck with those instead of bringing in the Borg Queen. God damn it. Anyway, so yes, Brandon in the chat says, I think Packlids were assimilated and rejected by the Borg. Yeah, I think I heard that somewhere. But Norman brings up the Kazon. That was the more interesting thing because Seven of Nine had a line later on in the show saying that the Borg deemed that the Kazon was unworthy of assimilation and didn't bother assimilating them. Which I thought was kind of like a nice jab at the Kazon, the people who wrote the Kazon in the first place. They're not even worthy of being assimilated. Fuck those guys. Anyway, but I buy that, by the way. But anyway, speaking of Seven of Nine, let's get into her big introduction here. Now, when I first saw this episode, I remember before I saw part 2, I saw an ad in the TV guide that said like introducing Seven of Nine, and of course I had no concept of this character at that stage, and I actually reacted to that very badly because I thought that was going to make the episode not be good, that they're going to be too focused on introducing a new character rather than doing a proper part 2 to this great part 1 that I saw. And I was very thankful that that actually turned out not to be the case, that they in fact did focus on the story and the episode. They utilized Seven of Nine for that episode. She fit in perfectly as a representation of the Borg and how scary they are, how intimidating they are, and how backstabbing they are. So played right into the conflict between Janeway and Chakotay. And I thought that was actually done really beautiful. And in fact, they kind of pulled back on the, ooh, look at this great new character. They didn't really do it that much in this episode, which I think is a great thing. They serviced the story first rather than saying, oh, the next episode they focus more on her, but it made sense to because that was more of a character story for her, her being separated for the Borg. So I think the way they did it was actually extremely well done, which is part of why I love this character so much and accepted her so much because her introduction was done so smoothly. The only thing I would say that they overdid it on is when Janeway said, have introduced a choose a representative to speak with us, and then there was all this smoke and all these things came out and like something like I think that I can see is something like the studio's demanding. That we gotta have this good fanfare shot of her coming out. But other than that, I think it was actually done extremely well. And I did read somewhere that they did come up with the idea to introduce Seven of Nine when they were coming up with part 1. And in fact, they toyed with the idea of introducing her in part 1, but decided not to because they wanted more time to cast the actor. They didn't want to be in a rush to cast the actors. They could take all summer to cast her. So it wasn't a plot point, because that was my main concern, is that they were just introducing this element out of nowhere of this new character. But apparently she was always the intention to be in part 2. And I think that shows. I think it was done extremely smoothly. So yeah, Alyssa, we'll start with you with 7 of 9.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. They did not need to rush the introduction of this character and over focus on her, because they got plenty of time to spend developing this character, and that's what they do. They, at least for the 4th season, they develop her really well. I think she starts going downhill a little bit in the 5th season, and then after the 5th season, the 6th season, the 7th season, we won't talk about. But I think that yeah, you're right. They did it as well as they could, introducing this character without going too much. And we don't even see her in her, tight, skin tight, sexy uniform in this episode. Like, that doesn't even come until later. So it is all about the story and how 7 of 9 fits into this particular story. And then we really start diving into her struggling with her humanity and the fact that she's kind of been institutionalized by the Borg and just used to being the Borg and all of those things. We can get into that later. We've got plenty of time to start diving into that stuff. So yeah, I thought it was a great introduction to the character, and she fit well into the story. I don't really have anything else to add. I kind of pretty much just agree with everything you said. You know.
Yeah, how can you talk down about a giant WWE style wrestling entry there? You know, they zoom back into there. The one room opens up. She's the only one there.
They forgot the theme music. They should have
right. They just
put a classic rock song.
No. Yeah. No, that would have been somebody do the re-edit. I want to see it on YouTube by tomorrow. No. Yeah, I mean it's a great intro, but you're right. I think one of the ways that it works so well is she's very antagonistic. She's not like, "Hey, I'm here to join the crew." In fact, she's really written and treated more like a guest star that ends up sticking around than being introed as the new character that's coming in. I think, and you know, she does an amazing job keeping that antagonistic but direct interaction with Janeway and Chakotay and everything throughout the whole episode. She's never, you know, like, I'm wondering what it's like to be human. How is your individually a thing? No, she's a Borg the whole time. She's dedicated, like I said, she was assimilated as a kid, so she grew up as a Borg, and that's pretty much all that she's known. So I think by keeping her this way, they do a great intro to allow this to someone kind of come over and then slowly build up. Also, we are sorry, Brandon's asking, why don't I edit it myself? Yeah, because I'm not that good. But you know, I'll see what I can do. Sorry, I lost my place on all of that. But again, I just think that it was a great way of interesting and then carrying the character forward. Also, and I know that it's not quite a big thing, but the one great thing about her introduction, really, that I don't know if honored enough, is the fact that her coming in is Kes leaving. And I know that's one more episode before that actually happens, but the show's so much better. That's one thing with both of these episodes that really, I think, pronouncedly say is how much we need to get rid of Kes. Just doesn't really work. And I don't know, that's a personal thing, but every time she did this, I was like, oh yeah, she was in the beginning episodes. I forgot about that. Then she's gone after this, isn't it? Yeah, 7 of 9. So that was a great thing. Now, and you're right, Alyssa, while we don't get the skin tight, sexy alien uniform that becomes the kind of Star Trek central theme, we do get the form-fitting Borg shot. So when she's lying on the table, we get the one shot of both bosoms firmly and cleanly set up there. So yeah, there was definitely some obsessiveness with alien sexiness through these eras of Star Trek. But yeah.
Yeah, so Brennan Braga and Jerry Taylor had to fight Rick Berman to keep her as a Borg in these first 2 episodes because he wanted to put her in that jumpsuit immediately.
Berman knew it was him.
Yeah. Well, as for Kes, I remember at the time I was disappointed that they were replacing her with a new character because I kind of liked Kes and I wanted her to be better than what she was. Like, I feel like they kind of misused the character, as I feel like they did with a lot of characters, honestly, on Voyager. But I feel like she had potential and just like it was just like they never really used the character well. There's so many interesting things they get to do with her. So at this point, yeah, you may as well get rid of her.
It's just the whole look. I mean, I'm gonna say it. I mean, she's like what 7 at this point. She's in a relationship with Neelix. That was just always weird. There was no way to not get around that for having it not to be weird. And it was better to move that off. If the character was introduced and there wasn't in a relationship or just was that kind of thing, they might be able to do something better with it. But I think at this point, at least to me, it was like this. this is just weird, and it's better to move on if at all possible than to try and find a way to make that work.
They painted themselves in the corner by making this thing where the old combo only lived to 8 or whatever. Like
9 years.
They shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, it's just, yeah.
And Norman is correcting that Kes was 3 years old at the time of this episode, or maybe 4.
Okay, see, that's just weird.
But I never had a problem with it, and I don't think I'm actually would argue against people who are against the Neelix and Kes relationship, because it is weird. You got to look at it from an alien perspective.
Oh,
she's not actually 3; she's in her 20s. It's like a dog. You don't say, "Oh yeah, my dog is 4 years old, so he's a child." No, he's in a full adult by 4. You just got to look at it at that in those terms. And I think there are other relationships, such as like Garrick and Zial, were way worse. Like Garrick's in his 50s, and Zial's like established to be 14, I think. But anyway,
look, I defended that. Look, if they'd committed to keep her around and that she died of old age before the series ended, I would have been totally down with that.
Yeah,
that would have been an interesting arc.
Well, she did return where she was, I think, 8 years old, and they dressed her up in old lady makeup or whatever, because she was, in her equivalent to being in her 70s by then, 70s or 80s. But anyway, I was gonna save Kes for later, but now that we bring her up, might as well talk about her now, because the original plan was to write off Harry Kim. Apparently, and that's why he gets attacked by Species 8472 in this episode. And I didn't notice this before until after I learned this, but he doesn't actually recover until part 2. And that's because he was the first one to get the axe, because they knew they were going to introduce a new character, and they only had so much budget for main cast members, apparently. And so if they introduced another main cast member, another one's got to go. And their first to axe was Harry Kim. And the reason why they pivoted from Harry Kim to Cass in part 2 is because Garrett Wang was on the list, on TV Guide's list of top 100 sexiest men in television.
Yeah, Garrett. Yeah.
And so they decided to go with Cass instead. I'm like, that's such a Rick Berman. That's such a stupid reason to do it. And here's what I'm thinking. Neelix is right there. Come on. If you gotta get rid of someone, get rid of Neelix. Nobody likes him.
That would have fixed the Kes relationship issue. You could have had the psychic around, and then you had the,
Well, I mean, at this stage, Kes and Neelix were broken up anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
This is what I thought. I think they went with Kes because they had no idea what to do with her in season 3. And I think they ruined her character. They tried to play her as like a sex appeal. And I hated through season 3 of Voyager. Barring this episode, of course. This is when the show got good. But before this episode, I think is easily the worst season of Voyager. And part of it is because they pivoted at the last second when they fired Michael Piller, and they had no idea what to do. So they were writing scripts at the last second. And they didn't know what to do with the characters. And I think that was very obvious. And I think Kes was the worst example of that. But here's the thing: when you watch the next episode, The Gift, they're actually writing for Kes well, and that in this two-parter as well. So I think had they kept Kes, I think they would have done a good job with her. I think they would have made her a good character, because this season 4, the writing was just so phenomenal. I think they should have kept Kes, and if you need to get someone, get rid of Neelix. Neelix was useless for the rest of the show.
Is that why Harry Kim was never promoted afterwards? Because he was supposed to die as an ensign, and so they just never bothered doing. It just kept him as an ensign for the rest of his trip.
Well, it's something I've quoted before, and like one of the later seasons, I think season 5 or 6, the Garrett Wang went to Bruno Berger, who was the showrunner at the time, and asked him if he could promote Harry Kim, and his response was, "I'm sorry, somebody has to be the ensign." And I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean? Like, why does somebody have to be the ensign? That makes
Who was the ensign on TNG, man? Who was the ensign on Deep Space Nine?
Nog, I guess.
West Crusher.
Yeah, Western Pressure on TNG.
Yeah, but Wes went to Eternal Starfleet study and then ran away.
That was the stupid response. Yeah, I mentioned a minute ago that I think Kess is among many characters who the show never wrote well for, and I think Harry Kim is another one. Not never. There are some exceptions. We talked about an episode earlier in this top 25. With Harry Kim where he was written well, but and I think about like the line that you mentioned before, where it's like, oh, maybe where there are Ellies. Like, he's just an idiot. He's just so naive, and he never gets past that. And every time, like, there's even like the faintest hope of that they might be able to get home, Harry Kim was like, oh, we're getting home, and it's just like, he was never written really. They really squandered that character. So I can see why they were considering him, because they didn't know how to write him either. But I tend to agree with you, Mark. Neelix was sitting right there. And you gotta get rid of somebody. I mean,
but who was gonna cook the food then, huh?
Yeah.
No, you're completely right. You're completely right.
Replicators, maybe. Yeah. Let's see. No one was saying the writing vastly improved in season 4. We could have had a greatly written cast episode. Given that Mortal Coil was one of the best Neelix episodes. I thought Mortal Coil was kind of boring, to be honest. But that's why they should have gotten rid of Neelix. Anyway, I got another super chat from Redneck Lover 22. Bob, thanks so much, Bob, saying, in spite of season 3, Kess would have been more interesting in the long run. Neelix eventually was an away team that he had no business being on. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, and by the time we get to season 6 and 7, they didn't write for any of the characters well, except for the Doctor and 709. It's the Doctor and 709 show.
I would argue that they were writing for them well. They just wrote for them, period. It didn't write
for else. Didn't bother writing for anyone else. Anyway, so let's get into the big argument between Chakotay and Janeway, which I think is what really the heart of this episode is about. And I love the way that is set up in the first part, where, they had this really nice scene where Janeway's like, you've been a rock to me, Chakotay. I don't know where I would be without your support. Like, you've been so helpful. We're going to get through this together. And then the very next thing, they completely fall apart. I think that was actually, I don't think that was too telegraphed. I think that was actually really good setup, like reminding the audience just how close these two got. And then we have Janeway comes up with her plan to make an alliance with the Borg. And again, I love how this is played, where, Chakotay just silently sits there, waits for everyone else to leave, like a good first officer, and then tells her, look, I didn't, and she can notice. She's like, I could tell you didn't say anything in there, so let's hear it. And he's like, yeah, I didn't want to say this in front of anyone else, but I think you're wrong. I disagree. This is a dumb decision. And I think what makes this argument so good is that they both have good points. Like, there's no one clearly in the right or clearly in the wrong. And I think Chakotay makes some very strong points of how you can't trust the Borg, which has absolutely turned out to be true, and that she's risking strengthening the Borg, which is actually very true, and that could lead to more species being assimilated. And at one point, he even says it's wrong because you're helping this very malevolent species become more powerful. And then Janeway's counter to that is also really good, saying that it's not simply about us getting home, because that's what Chakotay was accusing her of. Oh, it's more things that are more important than just getting home. But she makes a point of species 8472 being just as malevolent, and saying that they could end up like, if they just leave alone, they turn around a year from now, they could end up finding themselves facing Species 8472 again, and they would have lost their opportunity to take them down. And that Species 8472 could be the menace that wipes out the entire galaxy, and they have a chance to end it right here. And I actually side with Janeway more in this argument, but I can totally see where Chakotay is coming from. I think that's what makes it so good. But anyway, I'll open this up to thoughts on this particular disagreement. Darrin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, any good argument like that, you can see both sides of it. And I think that they established this very well. I do like, the kind of strength of the relationship that we've got, even though it's tested, obviously, in this episode, but really storing how much the two of them are relying on each other and how important that kind of connection and support really is. I do appreciate Chakotay leading with just kind of a standard parable as opposed to the, ancient tribal wisdom. He seems to have, like, through every time that there's a question, he's like, well, my grandmother told me a story about the Great Night thing. And this is kind of more of just a standard parable. I also heard this when I was a kid and has stuck with my mind because it is so well done. And I think it's kind of a perfect description. That's why it's a great title for this episode is, some things are just in their nature and you can't plan anything that's not going to undo that's going to prevent that from happening. It's also, I mean, it kind of I appreciate it funny and it just the way that you had to script this, but of course it is the way that they had to do. Like right when Janeway gets wounded, her last thing is like, you got to keep it together. You got to hold this alliance. And like the next thing, Chakotay is like, all right, Borg, get out of here. We're done. I can't trust you. But that's an obvious, that first kind of challenge. You can't necessarily predict what the captain would do. Is it better to go deeper into Borg space at this point than to just try and do the run? Have we gotten far enough that we can? Because, yeah, the two of them do have these opposing viewpoints, and I think it's legitimate to try and figure out which is going to be more powerful and more dangerous. Do you fight with the enemy that you know, or do you kind of go with this new enemy that may or may not continue to be worse than the one that you know? So I do really appreciate their kind of argument, the fact that it does ultimately come together when, hey, we got to stop fighting so we could do the standard, you're in the brig while you're secretly putting together the plan that's going to save us all. I will leave Alyssa to give us the code name. But yeah, it's I really enjoyed it. And I said, I think this is kind of the best kind of captain first officer pairing that we get through Voyager.
This is the best captain first officer scene, not even just argument, in the franchise. In my opinion, this scene is why this is my favorite Voyager episode. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why this is my favorite Voyager episodes, but this scene is what really puts it over the top. Because, as you said, Mark, neither of them are really wrong. They both actually make good points. And I think that really speaks to the fact that this is an impossible situation. Which enemy are you more concerned about becoming super powerful and taking over? Like, they're both right. Like, either one of them, I mean, if they help the Borg too much, yeah, you could be helping the Borg to eventually take you out. But if you ignore 8472, you could have missed your opportunity to take them down, and now they're going to take over the galaxy. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation that they're in, seemingly, which makes this discussion so fascinating. And furthermore, it's just that chemistry, that well-earned chemistry between these two characters that I think both the actors worked hard on over the first 3 seasons, like developing this. That it all goes into the shitter in later seasons, but which is why I have the episode shattered in the 7th season, ranked higher than a lot of other people do, because I think they actually get back to a little bit of the Janeway and Chakotay relationship that was just totally thrown out in later seasons. And this is kind of the pinnacle of that relationship, where they like each other, care about each other, respect each other, but they respect each other so much that they're going to be honest with each other and tell each other honestly how they see things. And I like what you mentioned too, Mark, that Chakotay, I like how Chakotay just kind of sits there and doesn't say anything. I was watching, another episode I know that we're going to talk about soon in your top 25, but there are several episodes in Next Generation where Riker just outright says, "With all due respect, sir," and just like disagrees with the captain in front of everybody. Where I love Chakotay's style, where he just kind of hangs back. Janeway's like, "Okay, I can tell something's going on here. Let's hear it," and just kind of waits for his moment, and even says, "Well, I didn't want to say this in front of the crew." But like, I love Chakotay. I think that's what makes this scene work so well. Just the chemistry between these two characters and these two actors. That's just, it's just magnificent. It's just one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek, honestly.
Real question I've got for you, Mark, is would they have fared as well if Captain Jellicoe was in charge?
Oh no, they all would have been fucked. Jellicoe was, he would do whatever the fuck they want and just get them all killed and be like, "Get it done."
For those of you who haven't, go check out Mark's video on why Captain Jellicoe really is the worst. Highly recommend that one.
Yeah, I'm in it too.
Yeah.
we just talk about it. Yeah, Captain Jellicoe is the worst because he is.
Because he is.
Yeah. All right, so, and I like what they do with this in part 2, the disagreement between Chakotay and Janeway, because Chakotay made it clear. He's like, I'm the first officer. You decide you want to do this, I'm gonna go with you, but I still think it's a stupid idea. and so he does. And I think in part 2, you could tell like that Chakotay is not really happy about any of this, but he's like trying to do his best to work with Janeway and follow her lead. But then what happens is that Janeway gets injured, and a serious injury where she has to be put in a coma, and teensy bit of plot contrivance there, but it's good, so I'll go with it. And so Chakotay is put in command, and at first I think he is actually, because he's already in this situation. Janeway set up this alliance with the Borg. He has Borg aboard his ship 7 of 9. He's still willing to go with them, but soon as 7 of 9 tries to push him and be like, "No, I want you to turn the ship around and go 5 hours in the wrong direction, deeper into Borg space," and I totally buy his reaction. That is like, fuck that. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so he puts the ultimatum to 7. Like, look, you're going to do that shit. I'm just going to drop you off on the planet and give you the virus, and you can be picked up by the Borg later. Don't give a shit. And then, of course, 7 of 9 takes him into fluidic space, and that's when Janeway wakes up, and they have out this huge argument. And you had that really nice scene too with Chakotay going to Janeway when she was in sickbay in a coma and like being, "I'm sorry," like apologizing, saying, "I'm sorry, I love and respect you, but I just can't do it." And I think that was so true to his character. But when she wakes up, they have at it, and I love how Janeway, they're arguing the points again, both making good points, because I kind of side more with Chakotay now, being like, "No, you're not going to go 5 hours in the wrong direction." But then she concludes, she's like, "We're fighting 2 wars. We're fighting the one out there and the one in here, and we're losing both." And so then they made it clear that they really needed to work together. Now, then they cut the scene and they have Janeway go on the bridge and tell 7, "No, I've relieved him of duty." And like, hey, he's not relieved of duty. You know that they're scheming something, but the scheme is so perfect because it takes both of their concerns into account. Because Janeway wants to go through with the Alliance of the Borg and eliminate A472, which is the right concern, that A472 needs to be stopped. But the Chakotay's concern is, well, once they do that, the Borg's going to betray them and try to assimilate them. So they address both concerns. They eliminate A472 and then have the backup plan to take down 709, which I think was a nice callback to the episode Unity, because Chakotay had, linked with the Borg and already, and knew how to manipulate them and stuff, which I think was a nice callback to that episode, and was able to distract her enough for B'Elanna to like shock her or something. And so I think that was brilliant. I thought that was a brilliant resolution to the episode, and it played off of the strength of the conflict of the episode and resolved it in such a satisfying way, and what makes this episode so great. Darrin, we'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, I mean, while I was joking, obviously, before with Chakotay, immediately kicking the Borg to the curb as soon as Janeway was out of it. The thing is it really does make sense, is because he's sticking with the plan. They're doing the thing. And as one might expect, the Borg are going to see an opening and try and push and take advantage, to which he isn't going to give in to them. And I think rightfully so, because you never know how much is sort of an agreed push and how much is, I can take this, and then surround you and then ask for more things and more things. I think it was right for Chakotay to give that pushback on the immediate thing, even to the point of willing to put 7 of 9 and the rest of the Borg onto some, random planet, and keep going on, because while he's agreeing to do what Janeway wanted, he obviously doesn't agree with the plan and isn't going to put the ship, more to the point, in more danger in his point of view, to try and keep this alliance going that he doesn't believe in. So I think you're right. I think that was the great way that this all worked out, is because everybody's choice made sense for their character. As I said, the only kind of contrived moment, if anything, was her just saying, yes, I've sent Chakotay to the brig because he disagreed with me. I'm like, oh, no, you didn't. Even the first time I saw this episode, I'm like, no, you're not doing that. But you're right. It does set up to, we're going to go Janeway's way. And then if it goes Chakotay, with the way Chakotay thinks, we're going to have that plan all set up. So I think that does work out really perfectly. And again, defeats the Undine. It gets the Voyager at some random space in Borg territory, but away from all of them, and is able to separate and take off from that point. We did our part of the job. Now we're gone. I think that was sort of a great way to sort of wrap it all up too. So, and you've got to say Chakotay, Scorpion, which, I mean, that should just be on a shirt at this point, I think.
Yeah, Norman says we knew that, but of course not 7. I never thought that we were supposed to be fooled. Like I never got that.
Well, the thing is, they didn't show them coming up with a plan. They ended the scene before they came together. So yeah. I think they were trying to fool some of us.
Yeah, but they didn't really think we were. Well, there was an exchange that they have just before that, Chakotay and Janeway, where Chakotay is reiterating something that 7 of 9 said to him, and I wish I could remember the exact quote, but it was about how humans are so inefficient. And it was something about along the lines of, you have too many different opinions, and you can't agree on one thing. Where the Borg, we just like decide something and we all agree on it instantly and we just do it. Where you guys have to debate and discuss things. And then I think Chakotay kind of brings that back around to the point of, we have to be together. She's right that if we're not together, then we'll fail. Which I thought was an excellent insight on his part. It wasn't exactly how 7 of 9 meant it. Chakotay doesn't want, them all to be linked up together and just make decisions instantly. But the greater point that if we're not together on the same page, we will not succeed, which is a greater life lesson that everybody could learn. But we won't get into the details of that. But yeah, it would be your undoing. That's what yeah, Norman's right. I think that was a part of it, where 7 says it'll be your undoing, and I think Chakotay brings that back. He goes, it says, "Oh, it would be your undoing," and that's what leads him to, like, we've got to work together. And such a great ending. It was such a whether it was supposed to be a surprise or not, it was such a great ending, a great resolution to this episode. And I do like that they did show that, yeah, Chakotay was right. Of course the Borg were going to betray them. And I do like that Chakotay and Janeway did find a way to come together and be prepared for that. So it was excellent.
Yeah, and I think that that what you brought up of 7 of 9 bringing up, you lack harmony, every decision has to be debated. I saw this sort of analogy as like the Borg representing a dictatorship and Voyager, the humans, representing democracy, and how some people will say that's the fault of democracy, that you have to debate things and come to different conclusions and see different sides of things, and how those saying, well, dictatorship's more efficient because they want to do something, they just do it and it's done. But it points out that the harmony of the democracy and why that's actually a good thing, and hearing different opinions, excuse me, and hearing different opinions and taking different things into account is actually strengthens you and makes you better, as long as you work together the way Janeway and Chakotay did.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Let's see. Well, okay, I guess really quick, I'll bring up Leonardo da Vinci hologram. That was that was my least favorite part of part 1. Seeing John Rhys Davies is a good actor, and seeing him be Da Vinci was kind of cool, but it's like, it was kind of an aside, and this is something they brought back. I think they only brought it back one more time in season 4. I think they went to his workshop several times in season 4, but they only bring back John Rhys Davies once. Yeah, but so that's one thing I don't enjoy about watching this episode. I don't know, it wasn't too terrible, right?
No, as far as the Voyager holodeck recurring go, this was pretty tame. Like this, compared to what they did with the Irish people.
Oh God,
that stupid luau thing they went through.
yeah.
And like, yeah, I mean, this was fine. I think you're right. I didn't really think about it because they do go to his workshop a lot in season 4, but I think you might be right. The only other time they see him is that kind of the dumb episode I didn't really like.
Where Da Vinci gets the hollow emitter and goes on the planet and has an adventure.
And it's like, what is going on? Yeah. My favorite Da Vinci scene was in Lower Decks, but
oh yes, not today, not on Da Vinci's watch.
But yeah, I mean, it was fine. Like, it doesn't bring down the episode for me. Like, it's fine. It's not on the same level of excellence. It's not what makes the show great, but it's fine. Whatever.
Yeah, I don't think it ruins the episode. I think it's just like I could have done without it.
It doesn't really add a whole lot. I mean, outside of, I guess, Janeway's a Da Vinci groupie. I mean, that's everybody's got their thing. It's always fun seeing John Rhys Davies. I'm always big for Sala jumping on the screen and doing something. So he's always going to be Sala from Raiders to me. That's it. I did like Sliders, but I have no memory of what his character was in that.
I remember Sliders. Like he's one of those guys who doesn't age, because he looked like, he must have been really young when he was in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but he looked like he was in his 40s, and he's still acting right now. So.
Yeah, he was in his 40s for 30 years, basically. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
He'll always be Gimli to me.
There you go. That was another great role. That was another great role. So yeah, he shouldn't be around too much. He should not be that cheap of a get. You should have to, you got to use your John Rhys Davis monies thoughtfully and appropriately.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up this discussion. Good discussion, good episode. So as always, as is tradition, although Alyssa, now I know all your answers going forward, but as is tradition, I'll open it up and ask my guests where they would have this episode on their own personal best episodes of Star Trek franchise. Would this episode be higher, closer to number one, or lower, further down the list, or somewhere around the same? Darrin, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say this is probably about right for me. I mean, again, the numbers are starting to get known, and there's only a few episodes that are going to be able to start to fit into the slots ahead of us. There is another season 4 episode that I do like more than this one. It's probably, like I said, my favorite Voyager episode. But this was, I mean, again, this deserves, I think, to be in the top 25. I think it deserves its place right here. It's a great episode. It's got great scenes. It's a great character introduction. It really does show a shift, to me, have a shift in the storytelling quality that Voyager sort of brings up until, as Alyssa mentioned, it kind of all falls apart later on. In the Flesh will never be mentioned again. But a great way of introducing, of using the Borg properly and bringing in a bigger villain to kind of set the stakes up high. It's very tense, I think, from beginning to end. I don't think there's any real wasted time outside of maybe the Da Vinci stuff. But otherwise, I think it's really well done. So I think you've got this in a good place on your top 25 list.
Cool. And Alyssa.
Yeah, Mark, you know my answers from now on, but not everybody watching does, because not everybody watching has seen my top 100, and so plug, they need to and then you too will know before I even tell you whether this ranks higher or lower than Mark. So finally, Mark, we get to number 17 on your list, where we finally reach our first episode that I have ranked higher than you do.
Yeah.
I happen to know what your number 16 is, so it's going to happen again next month. But this is the first one. This is in my top 10. This is number 6 of the entire Star Trek franchise for me. And the episode which I believe Darrin might have been referring to, I'm going to guess, another two-parter, perhaps season 4, maybe, I don't know, would actually be my number 7. So just one spot behind it, just neck and neck. And they were my number 1 and number 2 in my favorite Voyager list that I did like a couple of years ago. My favorite Voyager top 20. And I think it does have to do with the fact that I did watch this when it originally aired, and I wasn't super excited about Voyager at the time. I was just like, yeah, it's fine. And then they hit me with these, and I was blown away. And I was like, wow, Voyager can be a really fucking good show. And it just stuck with me. And that scene with Chakotay and Janeway, it just still sticks with me as one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Trek. So for all of those reasons, this is in my top 10, number 6. So I actually have it even higher than Mark does.
For the first time, one that's higher than yours.
For the first time, because a lot of Mark kept picking ones that were in my top 100 in like the my 26 through 50. But I did a video that was numbers 50 through 26, and a whole bunch of Marks were in that range.
Yeah, so I was looking through your top 25, and a lot of your are also in my 26 to 50 range. So you sort of like switched it up a little bit.
Look, they're all top 50. They're all that's it. They're all top 50.
Yeah. Well, he had a couple that were outside of my top 50, but they're all in my top 100.
Yeah, there's one in my top 10 that's in your 90s. And
I think I have a guess of what it is. Yeah, I think I know what it is.
But I like that episode more than most people anyway. There's a couple coming up that are like my favorites that not everyone's gonna agree with me on. But
Yeah. I have one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have one of my top 10 that I know that no one else thinks is a top 10 episode, and I don't care. It's for me.
Yeah.
Hey, that's the thing with personal lists. I mean, there are some measurements of quality where, you know, this is a great episode, this is well done, this deserves a place. And then there's always the favorites, which doesn't have anything necessarily do with quality or story or character or anything. It's just the one that connects with you. That's why my favorite film of all time is definitely not on anybody else's probably top 10, but, you know.
All right, what is it, Darrin?
Oh, Big Trouble in Little China.
Oh, there's plenty of people who love that film. I personally never got into it, but I know there's a lot of people who love that film.
Yeah, it's the perfect mix of action, comedy, and utter ridiculousness that just kind of I have a special spot for
Fair
things
enough.
like that. So yeah, and it's got Kurt Russell. So there you go.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, that's it. Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for everyone who jumped in the chat. J Cam in 99, Norman, Brandon, Allison, and a few others who dropped by. Thank you so much. Bob, I know, was here earlier. And yeah, everyone watching in the archives and whatnot. Thanks so much for watching. And of course, thanks for my guests for joining me once again. Still very much appreciated. So we'll start with you, Darrin, if you want to give a quick shout out of where people can find you or what you're up to.
Well, on the socials, on the Instagram, which I rarely use, and the Twitter, which is slowly burning to a giant trash heap in front of us all.
X, you mean?
I will not call it X. I am at Darrin Jakes. I've got a channel, D's Reviews, kind of a bit of a hiatus right now. If you like Marvel stuff, I've got a whole bunch of stuff in the archives. Just click the live view shot. You'll see these two wonderful people and a lot of them. But yeah, I think I'm don't have anything planned up until probably the beginning of the year. We'll see what the new shows dropping are. But otherwise, yeah, stuff in the archive. And of course, you can catch me on many, but not all, of Mark's top 25 countdown. He's always very kind to bring me on. And any chance I get to talk some Star Trek, I'm going to be there. So I appreciate that, Mark. Thanks so much. And I'll toss it down to Alyssa.
Come to Alyssa Jean's Reviews and watch my top 100. I have a video for 100 through 76, one for 75 through 51, then 50 through 26, and then we slow it down for the top 25. 25 through, I think, 18, and then 17 through 11, and then 10 through 6, which the last episode I talk about in that video is Scorpion. And then I've been doing one at a time, 5, 4, 3, and 2. I just released number 2, which you should go watch. I apologize. The sound kind of sucks on it, but I feel like I was talking about an episode I'm really interested in. I had a lot to say, and maybe I might be talking about that episode in the near future. I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, go check all of that stuff out and subscribe to my channel, and hope to see you all in one of my live chats. I've got one more live stream that I'm doing in December where Brandon always comes and Norman comes and Maddie Jester, and we have fun and I drink wine and we talk about whatever. So come join me. Keep an eye on my channel for more information on that. And hope to see you all soon.
Cool. And if you're finding me for the first time, my name is Mark. My channel is Enchantment of Eternity at the moment, going through TNG at season 2, covering a lot of the season 2 episodes. Hooray! And also, yeah. What else am I doing? Oh, this every month, counting down my top 25 favorite episodes with varying guests. So next month I will be back with my number 16. So yeah, be sure to check me out for that. Subscribe for that. Check out these guys, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.
Bye.